Have you ever noticed your mind refusing to slow down? Even when everything around you is calm, there's a steady stream of thoughts running in the background and a quiet storm you can't escape. You remind yourself to relax, to stay present, but your mind doesn't cooperate. It drifts into old memories, breaks down every conversation, imagines futures that never arrive. Even in complete stillness, it feels noisy inside. You think, and then you think about the fact that you're thinking. You see others laugh effortlessly, move through life with ease, love without hesitation, and you wonder what it must feel like to live without examining every feeling. For you, nothing stays simple. Every smile brings a question. Every goodbye turns into a full reflection. You feel deeply, think intensely, care strongly, and it becomes both your strength and your burden. You weren't always this way. There was a time when you felt without trying to analyze everything, but eventually your mind became your shield. A structure of logic and memory designed to protect you from hurt. Psychology calls it hypervigilance, when the brain stays alert long after the threat is gone. Maybe you learned early that safety wasn't guaranteed, so you started scanning for meaning, trying to predict challenges before they arrived. But this awareness has a price. The more you think, the harder it feels to truly experience life. Emotions get filtered, moments get analyzed instead of lived. You become both participant and observer, unable to fully embrace the present because you are busy interpreting it. Neuroscience refers to this as analysis paralysis, when constant possibilities freeze action. You begin to recognize patterns in people's behavior, in your own reactions, in cycles of closeness and distance. You notice truths others miss, the thin threads holding relationships together, the fear beneath someone's laughter. And yet the more you understand, the harder it becomes to feel like you belong. You want connection, but thinking gets in the way. You want peace, but clarity demands questioning. There's a fine line between awareness and overwhelm, and deep thinkers often walk it alone. You live in a world that values quick answers, while your mind seeks questions that don't have simple solutions. So you keep searching, through thoughts, through dreams, through late-night reflection, not to suffer, but because you need to understand why things are the way they are. But no one begins life like this. Deep thinking usually starts in silence. It begins quietly, a small child in a dim room, drawing while voices argue behind a door. They don't recognize the words, but they feel the tension. They pay attention to pauses, tones, the weight in the air. Before they can name emotions, they can sense them. And so they learn early not to cry, not to demand too much, but to watch. You may remember that feeling. Growing up where love felt uncertain, where warmth appeared and disappeared like weather. Maybe no one meant harm. Maybe they were overwhelmed, distracted, or carrying their own hurt. So you became observant. You became the quiet one, the one who noticed everything and adapted, the one who could sense a conflict before it began. Psychologists call this hypervigilance, the survival instinct of a child who believes awareness equals safety. A young brain, still developing, stretches itself to read moods, shifts in tone, the smallest signals of threat. Overthinking doesn't begin as intelligence. It begins as protection. The mind becomes a radar, constantly scanning for the moment before the storm. You tell yourself you're just perceptive. You tell yourself you're strong. But underneath it all, it's fear disguised as awareness, a need for control in a world that often wasn't stable. You learned to read people, to study expressions, to calm others before calming yourself. You became the mediator, the quiet thinker trying to bring order through understanding. Attachment theory describes this clearly. When secure love is missing, the developing mind fills the void with meaning. You observed your parents' silence, their moods, their expressions. Because your nervous system was learning how to survive emotional unpredictability. You started living in your thoughts more than in your body. Feelings turned into puzzles. Emotions became information. Soon thinking became your safest place. But that depth carries loneliness. While other children played freely, you were already questioning why people hurt each other, why they leave, why they hide truth. You felt older than your years, too aware, too alert. You held emotions too heavy for your age, so you hid them behind a quiet gaze. People mistook your silence for calm, but inside your mind continued asking questions. That child, the one who noticed everything and survived through thinking. Yet survival is not the same as living. Reflection became safety. Awareness became protection. And as time passed, that same mind continued studying, predicting, analyzing. That child grows up, And the skill that once kept them safe becomes the thing that separates them from others. Eventually, the quiet observer becomes an adult who analyzes everything. You wear your intellect like armor, polished, composed, untouchable. People admire your insight. They come to you for clarity, for meaning, for guidance. You're the one who can explain confusion, who can create sense from struggle. But beneath that calm understanding is exhaustion, the weight of always knowing. Thinking became your shield long before you noticed. Every insight sharpens your mind but softens your ability to feel. When someone hurts you, you don't react and you examine. You trace their behavior to insecurity, to fear, to childhood pain. You tell yourself understanding removes hurt, but inside you still feel it. You just don't allow yourself to admit it. It's unusual, isn't it? Emotional awareness can turn into protection. Empathy, once a strength, begins to create distance. You read people so deeply that you expect rejection before it arrives. You prepare for loss before love can begin. It isn't pessimism. It's self-protection disguised as wisdom. Insight shields you, but it also keeps you apart from the world you want to connect with. Psychologists call this cognitive avoidance, the mind staying safe by analyzing instead of feeling. You stay busy in thought to avoid vulnerability. You avoid emotional risk. Neuroscience shows that chronic overthinkers often have increased activity in the prefrontal cortex, the center for reasoning, and reduced emotional regulation in the limbic system. Simply put, you think to cope, but in the process you forget how to simply exist. You believe understanding will bring peace, but peace doesn't come, because knowing is not the same as accepting. You can understand love and still feel unlovable. You can understand happiness and still not experience it. Thinking protects you from others' unpredictability, but also traps you inside yourself. Sometimes you meet someone who almost reaches you, someone who makes you feel seen, not examined. But still you hesitate. You search for hidden meaning in their words, hidden danger in their pauses. Vulnerability feels unsafe because once it truly was, so you remain the observer, thoughtful, composed, reserved, intelligent, expressive, yet distant. Able to explain everything except why understanding never feels like enough. Even strong minds want connection. Science has explored why thinkers experience the world differently. Your mind isn't chaotic and it's active. Even in quiet moments, it moves with steady energy. Neuroscientists call this the default mode network, the part of the brain linked to reflection, imagination, and meaning-making. For most people, it slows down when they rest. For you, the mind never powers down. It loops, reviews, revisits, and replays. Not by preference, but by wiring. You don't simply go through moments. You analyze them, break them down, and keep searching for meaning long after they pass. Research shows that deep thinkers, reflective, sensitive, highly open individuals, have stronger connections between brain areas responsible for memory, imagination, and emotional understanding. Your mind isn't linear. It moves like a network. Every thought branches into more ideas. Every feeling links to many others, creating detailed layers of reflection many people never recognize. You can call it intelligence, intuition, or creativity, but it can also become mental overload. Your mind doesn't just think about the world, and it absorbs it. Psychologists associate this with openness to experience, one of the major personality traits. People high in this trait tend to be curious, imaginative, and responsive to deeper meaning and beauty. Yet that same openness carries a cost, emotional exposure. When your mental doors are wide open, everything enters: happiness, sadness, noise, intensity. You don't only see the world, you feel its pressure in your thoughts. Then there is empathy, a strength with a difficult side. Studies suggest that people with strong mirror neuron activity often absorb the emotions of others. You enter a space and sense tension before words are spoken. You pick up hidden hurt. You don't choose it. Your mind is tuned to notice. But that sensitivity means your emotional energy is constantly engaged. There's always internal background activity. Some research indicates that deep thinkers move between two brain states, the analytical network and the empathic network, systems that rarely operate smoothly together. When one activates, the other resists. So you shift between logic and emotion, reasoning and feeling. It's a quiet internal tug-of-war, structured yet chaotic, understood only by you. There is beauty in this complexity. It fuels creativity, philosophy, and self-awareness. But it holds risk too. When the same parts of the mind that find meaning also amplify pain, depth can become overwhelming. Thinking starts to feel like control, and overanalyzing feels like clarity. A mind that never stops can see what others overlook, but it can also trap you inside those observations. The same depth that gives understanding can also turn inward, creating an invisible heaviness only deep thinkers recognize. There comes a point when your thoughts shift from helping you to tiring you. It doesn't arrive loudly. It appears quietly, somewhere between reflection and fixation. What once felt like insight begins to feel like pressure. You think and think until the thoughts stop serving you and start consuming your peace. You lie awake, body still but mind active, replaying words you regret, futures that never happened, endless possibilities. It's a type of restlessness that doesn't require night. It follows even in daylight. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the unrecognized parts of yourself that grow stronger when ignored. For deep thinkers, that shadow is the mind itself. The same intelligence that once offered perspective now tightens around your thoughts. Every idea leads to another doorway. Every answer becomes a new question. You begin to ask whether your thinking is a strength or a trap. You see meaning everywhere but rarely find calm. There's a reason behind this strain. The human mind wasn't built for endless awareness. Neuroscience suggests that high activity in the brain's default mode network, the area behind introspection, can blur the line between creativity and rumination. You don't just consider life, you examine it deeply. You question love, suffering, purpose, existence. It's impressive and exhausting. You feel detached because your inner world sits several layers deeper than casual conversation. Words feel shallow, laughter feels brief, connection feels fragile. You sometimes envy those who simply live without needing to understand. To them, life just is. To you, life must make sense. And the search for meaning can distance you from living. Nietzsche wrote that staring too long into the abyss allows it to stare back. You begin to sense the quiet fear of being stuck inside your own depth. Thought becomes your comfort and your confinement. You see yourself in others' eyes, in quiet comments, in restless nights. Reflection without rest, insight without ease. It's not disorder. It's sensitivity turned inward and intelligence stretched thin. You keep thinking not because of curiosity alone, but because silence feels unsettling. Without mental activity, emotion rises, and emotion is harder to confront. Even this struggle doesn't appear alone. It's shaped by modern life. Sometimes you feel out of place, like your mind belongs to another time. Slower, deeper, quieter. You watch a world that moves fast, speaks loudly, scrolls endlessly, eyes moving like screens, attention scattered, hearts chasing distraction. Everything is instant, yet much feels hollow. In a culture filled with noise, silence becomes unusual. You feel the gap between your depth and society's speed. You pause and think, but the world favors urgency. You seek meaning, but meaning requires time, and time is limited. Technology has turned attention into something always pulled, always divided. Even your thoughts compete with algorithms pushing what to want, how to act, how fast to move. The result is mental suffocation, not physical but cognitive. Experts call it cognitive overload, a burnout of the thinking mind, overstimulated yet rarely nourished. Studies show attention spans shrinking, not from less intelligence but from divided focus. The mind split into pieces, chasing novelty instead of understanding. For deep thinkers, this fragmentation feels like emotional isolation. You see complexity, beauty, and suffering, while the world asks for simplicity and certainty. So you hide your depth. You soften your thoughts, hold back opinions, laugh politely, and try to fit into a culture that confuses numbness with maturity. Yet underneath, there is longing for real connection, honest dialogue, quiet understanding. When you speak with depth, the world often cannot hear it, and still you refuse to become shallow. Because thinking deeply in a distracted world is not weakness, it is quiet resistance. To slow down is an act of strength. To feel deeply is to resist numbness. To question is to protect your own mind. You are a quiet challenger, not through noise but through awareness, yet even awareness brings fatigue. Seeing deeply means feeling deeply, and when the world speeds up, your heavy, meaningful mind sometimes feels left behind. There is a unique tiredness that comes from processing everything. It is not physical strain. It is emotional and mental heaviness. You move through life noticing the small things. The couple, whispering tension in a cafe. The cashier whose smile doesn't match her eyes. The friend saying I'm fine with a shaky voice. You register everything. You carry what others release. These impressions follow you, leaving echoes. This is the cost of awareness. Every truth stays with you. Psychologists call it empathy fatigue, emotional burnout from long-term sensitivity. The same mental wiring that creates kindness also releases stress chemicals when overwhelmed. Your mind interprets emotional signals like subtle alarms. The result is invisible anxiety, not panic, but a constant subtle tension. You smile, function, move forward, but inside you're always slightly bracing for something unspoken. This is what happens when consciousness becomes too active. You start feeling responsible for emotions around you, for fragility in relationships, for the inability to detach. Empathy that once felt like light begins to feel heavy. You want to care, but caring is tiring. You want to love, but love feels like effort. You want calm, but the mind won't rest. You observe and absorb endlessly, and still under the fatigue there is something meaningful. Because this exhaustion doesn't come from emptiness. It comes from depth, from living with eyes open in a world that often prefers to look away. It means your heart is still sensitive enough to feel discomfort, that you have not been numbed by apathy. Even when apathy might seem easier, the weight still exists. The constant activity of the mind can blur the line between clarity and sadness. You begin to question whether awareness is worth its price, whether understanding life deeply removes your ability to simply live it. Yet even in doubt, something in you refuses to abandon your depth, because quietly you know this weight, this sensitivity, carries its own meaning. Within that weight rests a seed of change. When you learn not to silence your depth but to relate to it differently, you eventually see that thinking cannot solve every moment. You have analyzed every feeling, every pause, every memory that shaped you, but not every hurt is healed through understanding. Some emotions are meant to be experienced, not solved. Growth for a deep thinker does not come from more analysis. It comes from remembering how to simply exist. Peace is not the absence of thought. It is the skill of not accepting every thought as truth. A mind that never stops will not be forced quiet, but it can become gentler. Science calls this neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reshape itself through new patterns, new awareness, and kinder habits. The same neural paths once shaped by fear and constant thinking can learn to rest over time. Mindfulness is not removing thoughts. It is allowing them without being overwhelmed. You begin noticing small details again. Sunlight through curtains, the rhythm of your breath, the warmth of a cup in your hands. You start returning to your body, not living only in your head. Psychologists call this embodiment, grounding yourself in the present where life truly happens. Because no matter how sharp your thoughts are, they cannot experience life for you. Only your senses can. Gradually you learn boundaries, not just with others but within your own mind. You stop letting every worry take residence. You stop analyzing every quiet moment. You begin asking, does this thought support me or drain me? Writing becomes release, not performance, a way to let go of what stays unspoken. Creating through words, art, or movement becomes a bridge between feeling and release. And one of the most powerful forms of healing is connection. Speaking honestly without over-explaining. Sitting with someone and being fully present. Sharing silence without needing to fill it. When you live from inner depth, life stops being a puzzle to solve and becomes something to witness. You start to see that your depth was never the issue. The issue was believing depth must equal struggle. You were never too much. You were simply awake in a world that often fears reflection. The greatest realization is that deep thinking was never the burden. Forgetting how to feel was. There comes a moment after all the questions and sleepless thoughts when your mind grows tired. Not broken, simply tired of its own noise. You notice that your search, your analysis, has been a circular journey. You explored every idea, chased every answer, yet the peace you wanted was always in the stillness present along the way. You see that your thoughts, no matter how insightful, were both guide and limit. They helped you survive difficult moments, and yet they also kept you trapped in them. Every answer led to another question. Every insight opened another layer. You stared into endless possibilities long enough to see that the quest for certainty never ends. And true freedom arrives when you stop demanding answers and start allowing awareness. Neuroscience shows the brain remains active even in rest, electrical activity flowing through networks quietly. But beneath that activity exists something still, consciousness itself, the space where thought rises and fades. The quiet witness behind every question you've ever asked, Alan Watts suggested the purpose of thought is eventually to realize it cannot solve everything. Jung called it individuation, integrating light and shadow and recognizing there was nothing to fight. The paradox of awakening is this: the more you understand, the less you need to explain. You replace complexity with clarity, noise with insight, searching with noticing. A humble ease appears, not defeat but release. You no longer need to interpret every silence, analyze every feeling, or explain every unknown. You begin to meet life as it is, unfiltered. You start feeling the world instead of thinking it endlessly. You breathe not to control your mind, but to remember you exist beyond it. In that stillness, you meet a truth both ancient and fresh. Real intelligence is not in endless analysis, but in presence. Wisdom is not in knowing everything, but in needing less. The mind is a powerful tool, yet a difficult master. And eventually, when all questions quiet down, you hear something deeper. The steady awareness beneath thought. The thing you chased was never out there. You were never supposed to think your way to peace, and only remember the peace already within you.